Thank you all for joining us today as we explore a day in the life of Chinese languages. The Polaron team would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians throughout Australia and their continued connection to land, sea, and the community. I'd like to start with the agenda. We will firstly introduce our panelists and hear from Polaron's founder before moving to Yushi's presentation, panel discussion, and finally finishing off with the Q&A. Just a reminder that we will answer all of your questions and comments during the Q&A section at the end of this webinar. First off, I would like to introduce Yushi Shen. Yushi is a project manager within the language services team here at Polaron and has a master's degree in interpreting and translation studies. She also previously worked for a language services company based in China. Wonderful to have you, Yushi. Next up, I would like to introduce Dr. Jin Shi. Jin is the project manager of the RMIT Languages Teacher Education Program. Jin has worked in universities in Australia and China since 2003. She researches the multiple areas of education, such as language, teaching, digital, and international. Thanks for joining us, Jean. I would also like to give a warm welcome to Eva Hussein, the founder and director of Polaron Language Services. Eva is a certified translator, interpreter, and a NATI examiner. She will be our moderator for today. Now, Eva, can you tell me a little bit about Polaron?
Thanks, Carla, and hello, everyone from Europe. So we've been around since 2000, meaning that in November it'll be our 23rd anniversary, so quite some time, and it's got pretty fast. We work with about 176 languages, and Chinese languages are definitely top five, if not the most common one that we translate. We work with a lot of translators and interpreters. Many of you might know us, and we can move on to the next slide. Carla, thank you. So now what we're going to do is invite our colleague Yuchi to give us a bit more basic, but very useful, we hope, information about Chinese languages, because guess what? We get asked these questions all the time. What is the difference between Cantonese and Mandarin? You speak Mandarin as well as Cantonese? Are they mutually intelligible languages? How about traditional and simplified Chinese? So over to you, Yuchi, to explain everything to us in 10 minutes or less.
Thank you, Eva, and thank you, Carla. Welcome, everyone. So firstly, I will briefly talk about why there are simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese, as well as some key differences between them, so you will have a better understanding of the simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese. So firstly, we'll look at the historical context of Chinese characters. Yeah, thank you, Carla. The Chinese characters have been evolving over thousands of years. We had Oracle bronze script, bronze inscription, the letter seal characters, and so on during the period of Chinese history. These have been existing for like over 4,000 years, I think. So here we have an image of several examples of these ancient Chinese characters. So you will see there are 3 columns on the right. We have the first column means fish, the second means bird, and the third means ship. So it's interesting to see how the characters evolving from a hieroglyphics to the traditional Chinese we see now. So we have this second major phase of using traditional Chinese. This phase also lasted for quite a long time. However, due to the complex strokes and numerous numbers of characters, the literacy rate and education level of the general public remained quite low. So even though there were several attempts of simplifying characters in modern history of China, the success was not gained until 1950s. China mainland has the Chinese character simplification movement. It aimed to encourage literacy using fewer strokes for complex characters, and some characters were even replaced altogether to motivate more people to learn how to write or how to read. There are more than 1,000 characters were changed or replaced. During this process, we have Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan do not participate in this movement because of various reasons. So they continue to use traditional Chinese characters. A fun fact is that in China mainland, there are still people using traditional Chinese now, but officially we use simplified Chinese in the mainland, and traditional Chinese are used basically in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau. We also have Singapore and Malaysia, a region using simplified Chinese. Okay, here we have prepared some examples of showing the key differences in writing between traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese. You can see that these four Chinese expressions are all like referring to the same English word in simplified and traditional Chinese. They're identical words, however, they're written in different shape, in different form. So we can tell that simplified Chinese have fewer strokes in one character. For example, the hair in the advertisement, you can see it's very obvious. However, I must note that the conversion between traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese are not binary, because we also have influences of cultures, and Chinese phrases are combined by various characters. So it's hard to convert simplified Chinese to traditional Chinese or traditional Chinese to simplified Chinese, just referring to a rule or something, because we have culture impact on the expression of characters. So we have the difference in terms of lexicon as well. Here we also have some examples showing the different expressions for the same concept or the same item. So for example, for the document or file, we have two sets of expressions for simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese. So translators must pay extra attention to the common expression of certain things. It's not just converting the characters, the form of character. It's more important to use a culturally appropriate expression in traditional Chinese or simplified Chinese. It's also worth mentioning that even though traditional Chinese are used in Taiwan and Hong Kong region, they have minor difference in terms of lexicon as well. So this is quite important if you try to do a localization in Hong Kong or Taiwan. Lastly, I'd also like to mention two minor differences, but they're very important. They're often neglected. Is with the punctuations. Here we can see some examples of using punctuations in traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese context. We place the comma, period, and Chinese serial comma in the middle, in the central position of the sentence in traditional Chinese. However, we should place the comma, Chinese serial comma, or a period at the lower left corner. So this is quite important if we are doing translation into two sets of Chinese. And also, I'd like to note that for quotation marks, it's also quite different in traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese. Sometimes we must use the straight quotation mark in traditional Chinese documents or files, but this rule is not that strict in Australian context, I believe. So sometimes we can also see traditional Chinese documents using the curly quotation mark is acceptable, but it's it should be noticed when you are trying to do some localization work in traditional Chinese speaking region. Yep. I think there are definitely more differences between traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese that I did not include in my short presentation. So this is just to give you some overall ideas of how should we handle the translation into traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese. I hope you all find it informative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yushi, for that amazing presentation. And now we're going to move on to the panel discussion. So over to you, Eva.
Thank you. And look, we do have a few questions, but before I move on to those, I wanted to ask you, Yuchi, based on what you just said, I understand that there are digital converters between simplified and traditional Chinese. How accurate are they? Like, can you put simplified Chinese and get traditional at the end or vice versa?
Yes, you can definitely get them. However, it's totally like word-to-word translation. It's not accurate or not culturally appropriate. So we better find another translator to translate it.
So you really do need to specialize. Jing, how about you? Have you seen or used those electronic converters?
Yes, Eva. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I think in terms of your second question, like the challenges of translation between simplified and traditional Chinese, one of the questions that you outlined for the panel, that is the key because the online conversion resources are not necessarily always driven by the same information encoding systems. Yeah, I can get into more information if you need when you ask me the question, but yes, definitely it's not accurate as Yueqi indicated, and definitely not culturally appropriate always. Yeah.
Okay, Jing, and you might not be able to answer the biggest question we ever get, or the most frequent, and that is, do I translate into traditional or simplified Chinese in Australia? Given that Chinese is, after English, top language in Australia, how do you determine, or how do you work out? I mean, we often have clients come on to the session, so I'm just interested to hear your perspective. We, of course, advise people what we think would the best course of action be, but how would you, if it's a health promotion type of information, which Chinese writing system would you suggest, or do you just do both and that's the best way forward?
That's a very good question, Eva, and very practical. And we saw actually, a better understanding of the solutions throughout COVID, because as we could see that both Mandarin and Cantonese, simplified and traditional characters have been used for public information dissemination. And I think that is the right way to go because we have pockets of, suburbs where there are many people from mainland China, from Singapore and Malaysia, but other communities, the majority are from the Canton, from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, and Macau, where traditional Chinese is used. But also we have mixed pockets where both languages are used. And I would definitely go with both ways,
Okay. Two more questions. One is because we're confused. I'm sure that people that don't speak Chinese are very confused right now. And that is, you mentioned Mandarin and Cantonese. Yeah. Can you confidently say that Cantonese uses traditional characters and Mandarin uses simplified, or not quite?
I wouldn't say so, and because it's not very binary, and even in Cantonese, in the Cantonese, there have been a trend to simplify some of the characters, but I would say mostly.
Okay. And as far as Chinese languages go, and you might want to contribute here as well. There are many. There isn't just one Chinese language. It's like saying European languages, right? So I think we're going to be covering them shortly. But Cantonese and Mandarin are the main languages of China. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, some people consider Cantonese a dialect. Others consider it a different language. But, Yueqi, I don't know what you think, but these are definitely, for me, the two major dialects of Chinese. Yeah.
Yes, for me, I'm thinking Mandarin and Cantonese are all dialect. It's just we use Mandarin to be our official language. Right. We also have other 6 major dialects existing in China and various varieties existing now. So it's quite important to know that Mandarin and Cantonese are not the only two languages that are spoken in Chinese, in China, or like Chinese community, I would say.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So would you say, Yuqi and Jing, that these two languages, so the main ones, are mutually intelligible or not? Can you, if you're a Cantonese speaker, can you understand Mandarin?
I think they're mutually intelligible when you try to read them, although some, although some simplified characters, they are considerably different from the traditional characters, because part of the strategies of the simplification movement is to take out not only some strokes, but entire components. And as we know that traditional Chinese characters are considered to be better in terms of culturally representing the meaning. So it's actually has established a lot of, arbitrary links or pictographic links between the character and the meaning. But with the simplified language, you have lost that part of the culture. So some people who can only recognize simplified characters cannot then recognize the traditional character, and vice versa. Yeah. So, yeah.
That was going to be my next question, Jing, actually,
because
I was wondering, no, that's great, whether if you can read, so what Yuqi has showed us is that visually traditional Chinese is much more intricate, much more, there are more strokes, there are more characters and all of that. But if somebody can read traditional Chinese, it doesn't mean that they can read simplified necessarily, right?
No, that's right, Eva. Yeah, like for example, we have students who can only write simplified characters, but we have students who can write complex, traditional characters. But they will ask me from time to time, how do I write, for example, the example Yueqi just showed us, how do I write Guang, which is the first character in advertisement, in a simplified form? Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, and as would be the case with all the languages in the world, Chinese languages are probably pretty political as well. Am I right? There's like
definitely
agendas and sort of political movements of all kinds. But when it comes to translating for Australian Chinese-speaking people, what are some of the challenges, Jing? And you teach students, right? So, what are the basic things that everybody needs to know about translating into and from Chinese?
To English, you mean? Yeah.
Oh, yes, sorry, yeah.
Yeah. I'm keen to hear from Yueqi about this as well. But from my perspective, I think there have been a lot of, self-censoring going on as well, just because of the political climate. And also, there have been discrimination and prejudices on both sides to the Chinese Australian communities. And sometimes the Chinese Australian communities would be saying, we're sort of under the double gun, double guns, right? Okay. Yeah. But it's always the good intention to facilitate intercultural understanding, because the Chinese Australian communities have benefited a lot, from the good, and solid, whether it's economic or business or cultural relationships from both countries. And we just hope, yes, languages play a great role, but if we're not twisting the facts, which is very important, because you always need to fact check when you translate, but it's also better to try to, use languages that are not exclusive and not being coercive.
Yeah, wonderful. And very interesting. Yuqi, I know that you have quite love for languages. The other day we had a chat about your native language, which is not Mandarin. Is that right?
Yes, I can say that. I don't speak Mandarin as my first dialect. I have my hometown dialect as well. I come from Wuhan, so we have Wuhan dialect for that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I'm thinking for the main challenges for me as a translator or proofreader, it's very important for me to identify the audience. For example, because if my audience is located is from Hong Kong or from Taiwan, I need to use a more cultural appropriate expression for them. And it's very important to note that it's not a binary conversion. Do not use like Google translate between these two Chinese. Yeah.
And of course, Yuchi, the challenge is that we sometimes don't know where Australian Chinese speakers come from, mostly because the data that's collected by the ABS doesn't actually drill down to that level. Recently, we've been working on translations of the Voice of Parliament resources, and I think we've received some feedback, which was quite interesting. Do you remember what that was about?
Yes, it's about one translation for Aboriginal or Indigenous people. So this one, as Jing just mentioned, we should use more inclusive expression for that in Chinese language. However, our initial translation has used another word that's not so inclusive. So we got some feedbacks regarding that translation.
Yeah, and we love community feedback because, look, at the end of the day, of course, it's the community that's going to be using whatever resources we create. So we do have a process of feedback which is quite robust and also very proactive. But of course, and I pose that question to you, Jing, people have opinions about like there's no such thing as perfectly accurate translation. You give it to 10 translators, they give you 10 different versions. Is that the case? Like, can you get your translation 100% accurate, or is there always nuances that are sort of personal preferences?
Eva, that is a really good question, and it's I always think translation is such a personalized act, and it's also very artistic. Even with the same poem, you go to a lot of very reputable literary translators, they'll come up with different versions for that poem, and you get different feelings when you read it. And I don't think there's something that's called perfect translation, not only because of the language proficiency, but also, because people's lived experiences, our experience in Australia about what a multicultural society means would be very different from what's considered a multicultural, part or pocket in China. So I think, I totally agree with you.
A translator, a version. That's what usually happens.
Exactly. And also there's the issue of, No, go. Yeah, there's also the issue of untranslatability, and some words they just don't have matching words in other cultures.
And the interesting thing, of course, about that is that we when we work with translation, sometimes, as you said, there may be no equivalent. So we need to explain things in more words than what English or what Chinese gives us, because there are nuances or emotions that are attached to expressions and words. And, the nuances are like shades of words and all of that, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. If I can be a little bit frivolous here, many Chinese Australian communities, people in the communities would drop the F word, but they wouldn't use the Chinese swear word because they feel they have a deeper feeling of the swear word in its original form. But the Chinese word actually doesn't mean much.
There's no connection, and there's yes, that's such a good example, actually. And if Chinese is similar to other languages, you probably are seeing a lot of English influence. So for those that don't know, Chinese is the most spoken language, or Chinese languages, I should say, in the world, really, because of the sheer number of people that live in China. But are we seeing influence of English in Chinese, like things to do with technology, or is the purity of language maintained?
Are you asking me, or do you want to check?
Or Yuchi?
Yuchi, do you have anything to say first, Yuchi?
I'll wait. I'll wait for this one.
Yeah. I don't know, I mean, what you feel, Yueqi, but I feel like, the concept of language purity or authenticity these days have been constantly challenged. So if we go back to that idea about simplified and traditional Chinese, as Yueqi presented just now, if we were talking about purity, a lot of the, classical Chinese scholars would be championing traditional Chinese. But as Yueqi said, to improve the literacy rate in China in the 1960s, the Chinese government at that time was staunch about, installing simplified Chinese characters. It was kind of a national movement, and it was not completed until 1986 when they upgraded the full list, but the full list actually only had over 2,000 words, whilst the full Chinese character words, if you look at the biggest Chinese dictionary, there are actually about 85,000 Chinese characters. So you've not only lost the purity or authenticity, you've actually lost a lot of characters, lost a lot of cultures. Yeah.
Are they sort of descriptive characters that describe emotions, or because I think basic language you can probably explain in 2,000 characters or less, but it's everything about that, or the nuance or the beauty of the language that's kind of lost a little bit.
I think so. Yeah. And it's just, so a lot of the, let's say, the difficult characters, which are not used in above 90% of the documents these days, people still use them in their names. Sometimes there's a cool factor associated with that. And otherwise, calligraphy always, and so literature,
Yeah. And Yueqi, speaking of cool, and given that you're a young person,
thank you.
Are you
not
seeing
me. Okay, not me. Yeah.
And not me, definitely not me. Are you seeing much English in the Chinese spoken by the younger population?
Yeah, but I think the younger generation, they tend to include more English expressions in their language, or it's not like in written form, but in the oral form. They will come with some English word between the Chinese expressions. It's a cool trend for them, I think.
Yeah. So that's changing as well. I think English, and probably through platforms like social media, probably infiltrates Chinese languages a little bit. And social media is something that is very dear to Chinese people's hearts, I guess, because they have all kinds of platforms that we don't have, like WeChat and Weibo. Yueqi, can you just briefly maybe tell us about how important social media is to a Chinese person? And you can put some stereotypes out. It's okay, we don't mind.
Yeah, I think for me, or like my friends around me, we would like spend more than 3 to 4 hours daily on internet and just scratching on my social media. So I think it's quite important. So I can see some Australian government's advertisement on Weibo or other Chinese social media platforms after I enter Australia. So I can see government of health, their advertisements on Weibo in Chinese simplified. So I think it's quite important to get into your idea transferred to a larger group of your target community through social medias or online platforms.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that it excludes sections of the community? So I think Jing mentioned earlier the COVID campaigns, and I think from what I read that literacy rates for Australian Chinese people are quite high, generally speaking, but maybe not digital literacy, or is a typical older Chinese person, Chinese Australian, across all these different platforms? Are they very connected digitally or not?
I think they're connected, they have their own like social media or online platforms to share each other information or get information from. So yeah, I think they're quite connected.
And Jing, what's your experience in this space, if you can share that?
Yeah. I agree with you, Chi, that there's a lot of connections, and digital devices and social media, especially WeChat, have been used a lot in the Chinese Australian communities. When it comes to COVID specifically, because of the isolation, the lockdowns, actually the senior members of the communities, like other cultural groups in Australia, they have experienced a lot of difficulties because of lower digital literacy. And I remember during COVID, I was actually volunteering at one of the public housing estates in Richmond, and I remember one of the key questions was, how to get these Chinese, like older Chinese Australian citizens, so in the 70s and 80s, how to get them digitally connected. And I was very impressed by this lady who was 85 years old, and then
Wow.
she wouldn't let herself feel depressed, and then she said, let me establish a model for the rest of my communities. She learned how to actually use WeChat. She also, started a dancing group on the WeChat.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to look for her and see.
I know.
It's
I think
inspirational.
there's some news report about her. I can send it to you. Yeah, but I was really impressed. Yeah.
No, that's amazing. And
Yeah.
people are resilient, I guess, in adversity. And they'll find ways to communicate. But I guess, if anybody is listening to us that is interested in translating or interpreting for the Chinese communities, you do have to have a variety of approaches. And it's not like you can translate something, put it on our website and tick that box. It's really particularly about health information and anything that's essential for people to know. It's good to understand the community you're working with and use a variety of approaches because that'll be the most effective way, I think. And we're going to have time for a few questions, but I don't know whether I've shared this with you, Chi, before, and Jing, you might not know, but I've seen this publication, and I won't mention from which organization, but this is Australian government that produced a resource in simplified Chinese. And I don't mean simplified Chinese as a language. They developed easy read Chinese. And I was actually a little bit shocked by that somebody, so essentially what they've done is they've translated easy read English into easy read Chinese. And just logically, and many other languages, I think they did 15, that surely cannot work unless you have a specialist that knows how to write easy read Chinese, right? You can't just translate simplified English into simple Chinese, because it would sound pretty disrespectful, wouldn't it? Like, the register is so simple that I think it's not the right thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, but I could say that because if you want to get an easy read version of translation, you can just have an easy read English and have it translated, not translate into an easy read version of Chinese. So I think that's a little bit strange.
Yeah, I found it a bit surprising. I don't know if you've seen any resources like that, Jean?
No, I haven't. Thank you for, if you can share that would be great. I'll have a look. Yeah, I guess depending on what the purpose is, and then how, sometimes good intentions can lead to bad outcomes, which means you're essentially creating another system. And whether that's helpful or not, is always controversial. Yeah.
Yeah, and I always worry about how much money we spend on that stuff that people can't read, or you look at it and think, oh, what is that? Because I think the principle of translation, and I've been in this space for quite some time, is that a lot of people are literate in their own language. It doesn't mean that you have to dumb down the information that you're producing for them. It's just that they need it in their own native tongue. All right, over to Carla now. We do have a few minutes. There's been a lot of people watching it,
Yes.
a lot of interest online. That's amazing. Carla, what questions do we have for Yuqi and Jing, please?
Yeah, so we have a mixture of a lot of questions. I'm going to try to combine them, some of them. So the first question is, and I think Yushi already explained a little bit on the presentation, is, are there any cultural or geographical implications associated with the use of traditional or simplified characters?
Yes, I could say that. It's culturally and political related. Yeah, as I mentioned, because the Chinese simplification movement was carried out in 1960s in mainland China. So anywhere that's not included in mainland China is using traditional Chinese. So Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau, places like that.
Great, thank you, Yushi. And looks like there are some members here, that attendees, that would like to learn the language. So the question is, which language is better to learn today? Or which language would be the best to choose to learn? Simplified Chinese or traditional Chinese? And yeah, what are your opinions on that?
Yeah, I would like to listen to Jing's opinion because she's an education professional.
Oh, thank you, Yueqi. Yeah, I think what Yueqi just mentioned about, the geographical differences, that's definitely a big factor. Like, I've got students who want to, for example, after their graduation with their first degree, they want to go and stay in Taiwan for a year, and I definitely encouraged her to learn more traditional Chinese characters, because once you get into that space, that whole linguistic scape is different from the simplified Chinese linguistic scape. Yeah. But then I've got people who, for example, are on exchange programs in Nanjing and in Beijing, in Dongbei, different places in mainland China. And definitely, I would say, simplified characters would help you more. For new beginners, well, as new beginners, we're all new beginners. For beginners, yeah, I guess there's another factor, that is the practicality. It makes it much easier to learn the simplified version because of the number of strokes. If you're a very busy person and you have a lot on your brain and you want to reduce your cognitive load, I would say simplified Chinese is the way to go. But if you are a cultural connoisseur, for example, you really love the culture, you want especially classical culture, then I would say traditional Chinese. Yeah.
And Jing, what about the spoken Chinese languages? Is it easier for an English speaker to learn Mandarin or Cantonese, or there's no difference?
Yueqi, what do you think about speaking? Yeah.
Yeah, I speak Mandarin. I cannot speak Cantonese, and I think it's quite hard for me to understand or pronounce, because they have seven different like tone,
7 or 9 tones.
tonation.
Yeah.
But Mandarin only have 4, so it might be easier for the beginners to start from Mandarin. But as Jing said, it's very important for you to choose where you want to go, where you want to use this language for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I also think Cantonese, it's harder. Speaking is harder in Cantonese,
than Mandarin. Interesting. And as far as your students go, Jing, do you have typically do you have Australians studying that learn Chinese to a point where they sound native? Does it ever happen? Have you seen it?
Yeah, we've got like we've got very culturally and racially diverse learners. In the first, like in 2019, there was just a surge of non-background, let's say Anglo background learners wanting to learn Chinese. And then we had a lot of people who are from Southeast Asia, like Vietnamese, for example, Thai, learning Chinese. Yeah, so quite diverse. Yeah.
And you can get it to a level where you're very proficient professionally. Or do people struggle with the tonal aspect of the languages? Is that the hardest bit?
So the tonal one, yeah, I guess that's one of the main differences between Chinese and English, the tones. So we do spend a lot of time setting the foundation in that sense. And in terms of the levels, at our university, we have 10 levels of Chinese. And a lot of students, like, non-background speakers, make it to level 6 or level 7, and which is great, and they go on to, then after that we encourage them, or during that process we encourage them to go on exchange programs. It's because it's always better to be able to use your language skills in your environment.
Amazing. Look, we've got 3 minutes and one more question, Carla, if you could tell us if there's any burning questions.
Yes, of course. So there's more questions, but maybe this is the last one. Could be, what is the process of converting the text between traditional and simplified Chinese characters? Are there any automated tools that you use? And also, have there been any efforts to standardize the use of traditional or simplified characters in the global Chinese-speaking community?
Good questions. Anybody? I'd like to first answer the question, the first question. Do we have a converter for these two Chinese characters? Yes, actually, if you install any Chinese simplified or traditional keyboard onto your computer, after that, if you open the Microsoft Word document, it will appear a little button of converting simplified to traditional or traditional to simplified. So that's very easy. It's an easy way to edit on your Word file. You can also use online converters. However, as we mentioned, it's not always accurate and not always culturally appropriate. So it's best to have a translator to take care of that.
Thanks, Yuqi. And Jing, any efforts at unifying all the different written systems?
So I'm not sure about unifying, because I think
or standardizing.
So in Taiwan, for example, they use this coding system called Big Five. So that's their set of characters. And then in mainland China, they mainly use something called Guobiao, which is international standards, or more and more using Unicode. So if, for example, Unicode can be used in all kind of Chinese-speaking communities globally, that would make things much easier. As Yueqi said, you can actually find a lot of conversion tools online, but they're not always accurate. And I think the development of generative AI has been helpful. Not necessarily generative AI, but I know of one conversion add-on. So it's not necessarily a software itself, but it could be an add-on just to any of the Windows systems or Mac systems. It's called Xingyi, which means new translation. I forgot about the Chinese English name, but you can check it out. And I think that conversion tool is much more accurate than, for example, you go to Google or Baidu to convert, just because they are exploring the simplification movement. How, like we said, the simplified Chinese system combined and merged many of the traditional characters into one. So because they're exploring that relationship, so that conversion becomes more accurate. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So lots of developments in the tech space. And guess what? We've run out of time. I just wanted to say a big thank you to Yuqi and Jing for coming along today and sharing your knowledge. I've learned a lot, and it sounds like we've learned a little bit of each other as well. Yes. Carla, over to you just for a wrap up, and thank you. Really appreciate your time and knowledge.
Thank you, Eva. And for all attendees, if you do have any language services related inquiries, please contact me at carla.f@polaron.com.au. Be sure to follow our socials on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube for more Polaron. And I also wanted to say a big thank you to Yushi, Jean, and Eva. You've been all wonderful. Thank you once again for joining this webinar, and it's going more to come in the following months. So please stay tuned. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone. Yeah, thank you.